Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are picking back up again with Swords of X. And in this video, we're focusing on the return of Mad Jim Jaspers. Yes, we are. But before we get into that, we are going to pick up with a couple little fun things that happen here, a couple little small things. The first part of this focuses on X-Men issue number 14, but this is really just exposition. And the reality is we don't really learn a lot that we didn't already know before, but there are a couple things that we do pick up here. The first of these things really comes with the Twilight Sword. And the Twilight Sword, of course, as it's being wielded by Apocalypse's wife, Genesis, is a weapon that's part of the Ten of Swords or X of Swords event, right? It's one of the things that the forces of Morocco had to gather in order to fight against the forces of Krakoa. But as I was reading this, and as she was basically kind of retelling this origin of mutant kind, at least as it existed on Okara, which is originally what Krakoa and Morocco were before they were split in two, we of course get the same exposition that we always did, right? The Twilight Sword of the enemy tore the world asunder, and what was one became two. And I started thinking about this. Right now, it says after that happened that all the enemies of Amenth basically poured into the world, right? Poured into the main Marvel universe, right? So they came from this other place, right? Just this kind of, other dimension, and it led to them invading the world and seeking to capture it for the most part. Now, of course, as a result of that, you saw two things happening. You saw Apocalypse leading the mutant population against the forces of Amenth, and then you saw what was basically the White Sword, right? So this, external, this immortal mutant who basically has the ability to resurrect, him and his 100 soldiers every single morning to kind of fight the fight again, that they went through the portal alongside Apocalypse's wife and the various mutants who were there for the purpose of trying to fight these forces back, right? Now, of course, we know that just by virtue of the stories that we read, that the promise Apocalypse made to his wife is he would prepare the world as a place that could hold itself against the forces of Amenth, which is why he's always maintained this kind of survival of the fittest mentality, right? This is something that you can find in our video that we did on the new origin of Apocalypse in our X-Men playlist, where you can get totally caught up on the X of Swords event, right? The Ten of Swords event. But the more I thought about this, and this is what's so cool, the more I thought about this was specifically the Twilight Sword of the enemy and how his forces, how the forces, once this Twilight Sword emerged, that the enemy basically escaped, that like all these forces came pouring out. If I'm a betting man, I think that's Surtur. And here's the reason why. If you go back and you look at Journey into Mystery number 97 from way back in the day, what you had was a story whereby Odin ended up facing off against Surtur. And this led to Surtur being locked inside the earth. Now at some future point in time, and we're not really told when, Surtur managed to get out, right? Surtur escaped and then just kind of showed up somewhere along the line. This was back in the day when Marvel wouldn't necessarily provide these clear-cut explanations in terms of how A leads into B. Instead, it was just you get the end of A and then you're into B, and then you don't really get a lot of connecting of the dots. That's what made Chris Claremont's style of writing so landmark, was because of the fact that he did that for 17 years, right? It was a huge thing to kind of keep the story narrative going and everything tied into everything else. But if Surtur managed to escape Earth, then this would explain the Earth kind of, this land cracking in two, right? It just happened to be where Surtur emerged from. But the reason why I say him and nobody else is because, as you guys know, the main weapon of Surtur is a Twilight Sword. And so it makes perfect sense that Surtur basically emerged with a Twilight Sword and then went and did his thing, right? And then from there, all these enemy forces came pouring out, and who in the heck knows where it was that they came from, right? But the long and short of this is that with that bit of an explanation being offered there, that Genesis has kind of emerged here as a person who is in effect the leader of seemingly everybody, right? Now, initially she donned the golden helm of annihilation, which we talked about before, because it was what would allow her to control the forces of Amenth, right? And again, we're not really given a lot of indication here. What she really points here is this notion that the forces of Amenth are effectively leaderless, and that the individual who wields the golden helm is the person who can control them. And so it stands to reason that if Surtur was locked inside Earth by Odin, and Surtur basically formed this private army for himself and the forces of Amenth, and then somewhere along the line Surtur escaped, that he would just leave them all behind. And so without any real leader, the individual who dons the golden helm basically takes over that role. The problem with this is that the golden helm cannot be controlled. And so just because you put it on, and just because the golden helm will allow you to control the forces of Amenth, does not mean you can control the golden helm. And that's what she says, that the will of the golden helm is now her will, and the golden helm wanted to get into Krakoa, and so she does as well. And that's why she's basically a villain here, because her stance is we're going to end up fighting each other to the death, and her whole goal is to win the contest, or at least for Morocco to win the contest, so they can invade Krakoa. So that's the whole motivation behind her character, and that's how I think Surtur ties into all this stuff. But for the goody stuff here, right, the good little tidbit here, this is when we pick up with Jim Jaspers, because I feel like that's what you guys really want to see, right? You guys really want to see this. So here's a cool thing that happens here. right off the bat, right? We pick up with the crooked market, and you've got Jim Jaspers, right? And he's basically telling his guys, like, be super quick, right? Like, Saturnine will not tolerate us missing so much as a single grain of salt, right? The crooked market are the ones who are supplying the various foods and things like that for this great big huge feast. And this feast is being held in honor of the various people who are here that are fighting. Now, this is not uncommon. And in fact, this is really Jonathan Hickman borrowing from days gone by. In older years, it was common that when you had a war or a conflict going on between two territories that was designed to settle a dispute, and the conflict was being held in the location of a non-partisan third party, that third party would actually honor both groups and basically bring forth their champions, and then they would all feast, knowing full well they were probably going to kill each other in the morning. But that was just kind of the way that things were done back then, right? There was a lot of emphasis put on decorum and really the ceremonial aspect of what it meant to get involved in a conflict. Now understand, there's no love loss here. Just because they're all sharing dinner here does not mean they're going to be good friends. You know, you even have things like you've got Cypher, who's out there kind of minding his own business. You've got Storm, who looks like she's kind of flirting with Anubis. It looks like Anubis anyway. And then of course you also have Wolverine, who's just kind of being standoffish because it's Wolverine and that's what he does, right? He's just a standoffish guy. But the doors officially open, the banners basically fall in the hall, and then it's everybody make your way in. And as they get in here, it's actually an incredible sight to behold. And that was one of the things about Saturnine, right? She was nothing if not somebody who liked everyone to know just how good she had it. But you end up getting this really cool situation where we're basically introduced to Jaspers, right? Where Jaspers is officially recognized and declared here. And it's like all of this is brought to us by Jim Jaspers of the Crooked Market, right? We also get Lady Roma of the Fae. You get Vesperide, the colony queen of the Hoth Hive, or the Hot Hive, whatever you want to call it. Famine, who's basically the region of the former kingdom of Dryador. And then Jim Jaspers kind of comments and says, well, you may not be welcome into Dryador, but you are always welcome to my Crooked Market, right? If you come there, you can find virtually anything that you want. But here's the funny thing about this, right? Here's what's so crazy about this. And it's something super easy to overlook here. Jim Jaspers is acting incredibly casual here. He's like, yeah, I mean, come to the Crooked Market if you have to, but let's not be naive about this guy. Jim Jaspers is a guy who was so powerful that his alternate reality counterpart was a threat to the entire multiverse. They had to kill his universe. They had to wipe his universe out in order to save the multiverse. And he was still weaker than this version of Jim Jaspers here. This guy is a multiversal force. That's all this guy is, right? This guy is just death incarnate. There are very few things, very precious few things that could stand in the face of Jim Jaspers. Now, this guy is ridiculously overpowered. Now, how his power compares to Saturnine, I'm not really sure. And I would really say just pomp, circumstance, and just being polite here is the only thing that's keeping Jim Jaspers from just being like, you know what, I'm bored. Let's turn everybody into cupcakes and then stomp on them, right? I feel like that's the only thing that's stopping him from doing that. Or just waving his hand and turning everybody into blobs of goo, and that's the end of them. No one here could stop Jim Jaspers if he got bored and decided to kill everybody. That's kind of what I'm telling you here, right? That's how powerful this guy is. That's how powerful Jim Jaspers is. And that's why it's so incredibly exciting to see him back, because I feel like things are gonna pop off in this place. Now, the other funny thing that happens here is you've got Brian Braddock, right? And Brian Braddock is here just kind of, you know, doing his thing and just sort of chilling out. And Wolverine walks up on him and he's like, look, man, you had an opportunity to basically stop all this, right? Like when Saturnine took you to her bed chambers and you guys were going to do, you know, you guys were going to do the thing, you know, you were going to knock boots. Like you could have just gone through with it, right? And then like none of this would have happened in the first place. You know, he's like, well, I'm a married man. He's like, well, here's the thing though, man. Like, you know, if you really cared about all of us, you would have taken one for the team. It's what I would have done. You know, I would have taken one for the team and just called it a day. It's kind of a funny little thing. Obviously, no respectable man would do that, but you know, Wolverine is not really a respectable guy, right? And so what he really does here is he kind of looks at Brian Braddock as the reason for this whole problem. He's like, you know, I'm not really going to be watching anybody out there who's most likely going to die. Instead, I'm going to be watching you. I'm going to be keeping my eye on you, and I'm going to know that with all the people who die from Krakoa, if any end up dying tomorrow at all, they will all have died because of you. Now, the other part of this comes with Gorgon and Ilyana Rasputin. Now, Gorgon is a guy that we haven't really covered too much in Marvel Comics. In fact, I think the only time we really offered any measure of explanation on him was during the events of Secret Empire, because he was part of the Hydra Inner Circle. And so we could do with a bit of explanation here. The idea behind Gorgon's powers and the reason why he wears the mask the way he does is because he essentially has the powers of Medusa. If he were to take his mask off and he were to look at you, you would turn to stone. And so he wears that mask in order to prevent that from happening. The problem with this is it takes away his eyesight. And so Gorgon is a guy who is by by all standards of measurement blind, even if only because he chooses to be, but he's also probably one of the best fighters in all of Marvel Comics. When I say all of Marvel Comics, I mean all of Marvel Comics. Like, this guy could give almost anybody a run for their money, and it doesn't really matter who it is. The other part of this is that with him and Magic sizing up everybody here, you've also got Isca. Now, Isca, as a lot of you guys, if you may recall, she's a person whose mutant power is that she can't lose. And so if, for example, she's part of this whole great big huge tournament, and her mutant power, because she can't lose, is that things going the way they are, it's obvious the forces of Krakoa are going to win. She turned against the forces of Arakko. It's just the nature of her powers. Now, what Marvel doesn't really explain here, and this is the problem you have with a power that's this ambiguous, is it passive or is it active? When it comes to powers in Marvel Comics, you have active and passive powers, and even in DC, it works the exact same way. So something like Superman's frost breath, that's an active power, right? He actually has to blow frost breath at somebody. But something like Wolverine's healing factor is a passive power. He doesn't have to do anything. It just automatically happens. And so we don't know if that's the case with her, or if it's active or it's passive. We don't really know. We don't know if, she allies with Arakko because she's foreseen that Arakko is going to win. We don't know if she allies with Krakoa, or if she ends up turning against Arakko and allies with Krakoa because her mutant power tells her Krakoa is going to win. We don't really know. Marvel hasn't really taken the time to explain it. It may be one of these things where Hickman kind of gives us this bit of a tease, and we don't find out how her powers work for 100 issues, right? That's entirely possible. But the cool thing about this is that because they're aware of Isca's ability, the question is, which side does she favor? Does she favor her left side, her right side? How deep do her powers go, right? That's the question of Gorgon and Magic. And so what they end up doing is basically kind of, approaching her, offering a bit of small talk, obviously giving her a little bit of a hard time. And then as a test, they drop their glasses at the same time. And because she's ambidextrous, she catches them both and doesn't drop one drop of it. And so it's like, okay, of course she's ambidextrous. If she can't lose, she has all the skills she needs to succeed. And so she doesn't really favor her left or her right side in fighting. And so she doesn't really have a definitive weakness in terms of her fighting style. In turn, she pulls the same stunt on Magic and Gorgon, and then Magic opens a portal that causes them to fall back through. And then of course it's like, we caught him. So again, it's one of these cool things where these foes, these various fighters are learning a lot about each other, because understand, this is the first time all of them are meeting each other, which is a really, really cool moment here. It's the first time that they're all meeting each other. And so when you have this bit of a discussion here, you actually end up having Storm, who approaches the Horseman Death, and the two of them all start talking. The two of them kind of have this great big huge conversation. Now, there is a bit of a tease insofar as maybe Storm is kind of romantically attracted to him. Maybe it's this kind of devil-may-care or a bit of a mystery or intrigue. But one thing to understand about Storm, she's not some wide-eyed girl who just stepped out into the world. She's not naive, right? She's not a naive person. And so while she is kind of entertaining this possibility that there could be a romance between her and the Horseman Death, she basically ends it fast, right? And she's like, I've danced with your kind before, and I was curious what kind of person you were, because I'm going to be fighting you. And now that I know what kind of person you are, I know that one, you're an honorable and respectable person, but two, I know that I wouldn't really have any qualms with killing you. And so from there, he kind of picks up with Saturnine speaking directly with Wolverine, right? And Wolverine is really just kind of pissed, right? He's just walking around like a big grump, like he usually does, but a little grumpier than normal. And Saturnine kind of asks him, I know when a mind is burdened, what's on your mind, right? What are you thinking? And at the end of the day, he kind of holds off in having a conversation, but she kind of pushes and prods, and he says, fine, right? It doesn't have to be like this. All you have to do is take whatever it is that you want, and then we can end this here. There's no need for some great big ceremony. None of this is a necessity. You're playing a game. You're being awfully cavalier with all of our lives for your own entertainment. Now, for Saturnine's part, she's in her rights to do this, right? The conflict between Krakoa and the conflict between Arakko happen to come up on her doorstep, and that's the nature of the beast. When two people are fighting and their fight takes them into somebody's house, they don't get to dictate how the person who owns that house allows them to fight. They fall under the rules of the person inside that house, right? A man doesn't walk into another man's home and start telling him what's what. It's just the way it is, right? And so because their conflict led to them to this point, she's the one that gets to call the rules, right? And so that's just kind of the way that goes. And the response she really gives here is, I said exactly what I meant, right? Death is the great change. Everything dies, right? One of you guys are going to die here, and everything's going to change after. If anything, I'm just curious what it is that's going to happen. And the response of Wolverine is, those are some famous last words. Pops his claws and stabs Saturnine. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.